아니 람지림비 나네 잠로다 셈제다 사장 라면나줄 숨라 그된 자반에 시도 내체데 잠로 티바치 쪼호당 잠로에 다 티바치 쪼호데 셈제데 티바 치라 안에 티바스 뭐 한두지나 잠로 쪼호인 바다 셈제데 안에 티진지 쪼호인 바다 맞아 말에 아니 가 종을 줬으면 강에 값어야 난단 차와 송배 튀주고 니니 거기 미바 부담을 채와 튀주고라 미바 중사를 채와 그 미용바 남지는 바 장사회 용화 때네 아니 튀지 주도 봐도 드니기 잠들었음지기 아니 찌마가 마야와 괴와 인사 괴외 너나 저바 찔럽지 팔지는 바 타다 저바 찔럽으니까 마가 친루라 로외 친루라 로외 파지는 바 타다 차진디 온디 텐지 토바이 온도 아니 텐지 토바이에서 신이 된주네 신데 저바 찔럽게 파탐제 차진디 온도라 아니 텐지 토바이에서
So here then, as we've said, then as far as the taking refuge and going for bodhicitta, this is explained here in the context of the preparatory practices for the actual engaging in the practice of Mahamudra. But this is something that has to be applied throughout the entire practice. In the sub-commentary here, it says that here, this within the stages of the path, the development of producing having refuge in bodhicitta, accumulating merit and purifying yourself of any kind of negativities, as well as the yoga, guru yoga. These three are something that one has to do. It's extremely important to perform these, and one should do this in private when one's doing this kind of practice. And likewise, going for a refuge itself is the chief among the general practices for the general vehicle, all of the three of the vehicles. And then likewise, production of bodhicitta is chief among the practices of the Mahayana. So it's not taught that way. It's not something that is just simply taught that way, but it is something that has to be put into practice assiduously with a great deal of effort. So here, when you're doing it at the beginning of a session of meditation, on Mahamudra or any other practice. It's not something that you, when you're doing these two, development of bodhicitta, going for refuge and developing bodhicitta, you don't do this at the beginning of the practice. At the very beginning, just sort of spitting the words out and then continuing on without really maintaining the attitudes that you've generated there. That's not right. Rather, throughout the entire sequence of the stages of the path, you have to maintain these, and it's something that you have to produce a kind of produce the experience of going for refuge and developing bodhicitta, because these two attitudes actually fulfill all of the different parts of the stages of the path while one is practicing them. So all the way up until the end of the meditation session that you're engaged in, it's important that you don't relinquish the sort of feelings, the sensation of refuge and bodhicitta that you have during the course of the practice. And then all the way up until the Dona Chupa Chilaba. Chupa Chilab.
Chupa Chilaba Sena, Jisu Chindula. Chindula. Chupa Chila Pachilam Jiribatada.
So in brief, all of the different kinds of general practices of generosity and so forth, the 6 perfections and so forth, and through all of these stages of the path, the entirety of those are something that let's see, you have to do that prior, this preparatory practice for the practice of Mahamudra is a practice that enables one to complete all of these different stages through the course of the stages of the path.
Oh yeah, that's one right. Jamdo semjene choba chilo ji paji shun tamje ane chajeng gi onro dita boda padu duwares. Shun dita chajeng gi shun dita je lame lamji zo namba sumdu duwa ma do. Oh jamdo Sunyu gun tuan tamje ten, leji gun tuan tamje drusa ma mambo yonde, tato misaji gawara yeba mato tamje yiten do miruwa leba tau, tate moga shisha dusirwa. Da tini di je la, kiu sumji jamdro tsanyi bala rang la yang, an na se chi tamje nini shi de shungdu. Wa, kiu chungi jamdro, kiu dingi jamdro, kiu chimbi jamdro sumgi nane, na se chi ane kola zambo wada chaba janyi re wa da de kan de sana chung ga so ngan dunga le jixin zaba jine ane kujo so la jasu zwa ding ge ga so kowe dunga la jixin zana ane ga so re kujo so la jasu zwa 첨비 가서 그 스시 집바 코에 동안 다 스시 집발에 때문에 안에 구조선을 접수 좋아지 다 두시자에 임바다 저봐 두시 나세지 잠재니 영화인데 소소시 집바 터모 많이 배서 기부 충을 가서 안지 동아 딩게 가서 안에 코에 동아 지 아니 첨비 가서 스시 집발을 아니 스시 집발에 아니 지네 아니 군조설라 점리소의 이지지 제지비를 차위 sem중데 다 교수님 소소키 아니 가서래 잠조 잠보와 맨나 나송기 동안라 지신단에 대래 교위 점리 군조선보다 대래 점리수 처음이었거네 이지 제지비를 차위 sem중데 교충무체 다 대나서 코에 동안라 지신단에 차위 sem중데 교증체 시시 집안에 안에 지신자네 예제 제외 숨지리 교 침복이 안에 점도 되게 잠보 같아.
So then, with the way we've described the production of going for refuge and the development of bodhicitta, or I'm here actually specifically, I need to correct that, going for refuge. There's different levels of it as we described, and we can also distinguish even within the different levels whether there's sort of the minimal level of going for refuge or a form of going for refuge which is fully qualified or has all of the attributes of a fully qualified form of going for refuge. With respect to the first form of going for refuge, as we described, there's when one has I'm sorry. This pertains la kondaken ti nyemaso jukso di kaza kibusungi
kibusunbo rang ki jamdo tela jamdo zambo wa da chaba jare sha de ka le zambo wa ka re sana rang ki pena chung ga so ne song ki dong le ji xin zha ne ane ku jo som la o de ra chaba 什么可以动了即兴炸吧他们经常现在即兴炸他们是讲是实际就把了即兴炸吧是吧即兴炸呢对的参与什么中
So there's three different levels of going for refuge, whether you're talking about refuge for the person of lesser scope, intermediate, or greater scope, those three. That is, and the types of refuge can be, again, subdivided into sort of the minimal level of it or the fully qualified form of going for refuge. Taking, for example, here the going for refuge, the person of smaller scope, as we described, you, first of all, you're concerned with your own suffering, but only in the sense of suffering that you're going to have to experience in the next life. So you're frightened, terrified of the potential you have to fall into a lower realm of existence. And out of that fear, then you go for refuge to the three jewels to protect you from that. So that's the minimal level of it for that person. And then for the person of intermediate scope, they've generalized the types of suffering that they're afraid of to include not only the sufferings of the lower realms, but also the sufferings of the upper realms. And therefore, they're frightened of and terrified of the sufferings of the entirety of samsaric existence. And based on that fear, they go for refuge to the Buddha Dharma Sangha as being able to provide them with protection from that fearful outcome. And that's, again, the basic level of going for refuge in that, as a person of intermediate scope. Then the person of greater scope goes for refuge to the three jewels by being frightened of not only the sufferings of samsara, but the danger of falling into a state of peace and the sort of limited type of nirvana of an arhat, and thus out of fear of both suffering of samsara in general and the possibility of falling into nirvana. They have, out of that fear, then they go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. In each of those three cases, then that's the sort of minimal level of going for refuge on those three particular levels.
Oh yeah, that is Zambo Wachen. And they tell that Lo Chabatu party. Lona party is a Lo Chabatu Kuni, Pane Chabajan to Gualas. And it Randa Jutadi, Jushenji, Jabla, and a Jabjawa Zamji, and a Jumniji Zam, Zoa Tone, Shenjuji Jabla, Reva Zamji, and a Jumniji Zam, Zoa Tone. And a Gujo Shani Las, Gujo Shani, Sanja Gujo, Chu Gujo, Shani La Dene, Sosu Gabji, Che, and a Jew Chungu Gabji, also. Ani ngasong kedengar jonggangi jap ngoi de karere sana jo chungyu kapji ngosi jomni de karere sana ta derewa kasore mega jugo chutimde sosi kapji ani kapji chungoi de chungyu kapso ani mega jubong chutimda mega rajila dusin tele medobe tamja wi chuji ani rewi semjunde 아니 잠도 저 충을 값이 좀 잠도 잡아지.
So thus then, if we then return to the person of smaller scope, simply having the attitude of relying, it's actually a mental factor or a sort of a mind state of wishing to, relying upon the three jewels to offer you protection from the sufferings of the lower realms. That's this minimal level of going for refuge. It's actually a particular mental factor or mind state that that induces you to rely upon the three jewels for protection from those specific fears. Then, but that's just the minimal level of it. Then the fully qualified or a special form of that is where one has that as a foundation, but then goes beyond that and then forms the intention and begins to engage in the actual refuge itself, which in this case, for the person of lesser scope, entails engaging in the practice of avoiding the 10 kinds of non-virtues, avoiding negative kind of karma that would actually lead to one being reborn in the lower realms of existence. So once one goes beyond the mere sort of thought to rely upon the three jewels and then engages in the practices that are found within the Dharma jewel, the avoidance of the 10 non-virtues, that's the primary refuge itself within that level of the person of lesser scope. Then one has actualized refuge in the fully qualified sense for a person of smaller scope.
Oh yeah. 미도바 탐자의 추대레위 섬중대 잠도 쳐바자 세가나다 쇼군 쳐를 접수도 잠도 쳐바자 어 대인산 대라고 나태나신 전에다 지보라 지부 첨보당 아니 등이라양 진짜 주로 와 그저 시안이라 때네 소소까지 최 아니 가서래 코가라 집 코위 집발에 껴비 최응어에 남대라와 남대 최응어에 남대데 란지라 두바 란지라 두진 대람에도바 탐자의 추위를 있음중 자적으로 와
So then, likewise, with respect to I should say, the translator missed something here, that it's not just merely having the attitude of relying upon the Dharma jewel as it pertains to a person of smaller scope. The Dharma jewel there is particularly the avoidance, the Dharma of avoiding the non-virtuous actions. So for the person of smaller scope, that's the principal aspect of the Dharma that they're relying upon. It's not simply having the attitude of wishing to rely upon that, but it's a firm resolve not to give up or to turn away from relying on that aspect of the Dharma. And then the same thing applies if you transfer the same basic pattern to the person of intermediate scope. There, the Dharma jewel is primarily the path, the true path among the Four Noble Truths, the reality or truth of the path. So there, the person forms the intention to rely upon that Dharma jewel, but then when they actually, and that's the sort of minimal level of going for refuge there within the person of intermediate scope. Then when one goes beyond that and forms the firm resolve to take up that Dharma jewel and to begin practicing it, the truth of the path, and without ever relinquishing it or turning away from it, then one has actualized refuge there in the fully qualified sense for the person of intermediate scope.
Oh yeah, 고람니보다 란지라 두치 텔라메토바 탐자 위치에 있어 잠도 아니 저 등가사 대대 텔라 고네 아니 제라메 데비 뒤송 안둘라 껴와라세 데비 뒤소 껴와 치마 데비 뒤송 나선도 껴와라 유 뒤나 이 미개와라 주바라 쇼거와지 고레세 유 땡데라 세딜라 이 미개와라 주바라 쳐와데 미개 주뽕와지 고그래 예수신세라 이 미쳐와 예수신 최고 저 정무서 줘봐양 다들이 미개 주뽕 저 충이 가서 아니 뭐서 안도 껴와 고바 챙겨대 안에 가르를 해서나 미국 지방고 출입 인장 저 충의 가서 저 충의 잠 최고죠 어디 미국 지방고 출입 잡아야 돼.
So then, again, with respect to this special form of going for refuge, and referring again to the person of lesser scope, J. Lama himself has said, and out of consideration of this, he said that if in order to gain the refuge, that is the protection from falling into the lower realms as a result, then at the time of the cause, one has to fix one's mind such that it doesn't engage in non-virtue. He taught it's necessary to do that. So that statement from J. Rinpoche is also in reference to the same thing. So this formulation then is the actual way in which going for refuge to the Dharma jewel is presented.
다들 맨날 시신이가를 전에 대신 투모 많이 배짜였음라스 꾸졌음 못해라 레비 잠로데 지우든다 투모 많이 바기 잠로데 텐라와데 지우든다 명화 인자 지우든다 투모 많이 배잠로 연장 텐라와데 대신 이 잠로 쳐봐자 말했어 디 많이 바가를 해서는 뒤에서 조장 톰저제 예장 뒤에 매줘봐 아니 미도바기 셈고고 아래 미도바이 셈다기 예수받아 조장 톱자 탁 째네 대 뒤 탐제도 톱자 탑 째봐 대래 미도바 안에 탐제 개발전도 주와 탐제 개발전도 주와주고 그래
So thus, and to apply that then in the context, the same pattern, in the context of the greater vehicle going for refuge there we say that fear of both existence and peace, that is samsara and the limited peace of nirvana, is the principal motivation, the unique motivation which is unique to going for refuge within the Mahayana. So that is the going for refuge to the three jewels within the context of the Mahayana practice. And that is a kind of going for refuge within the Mahayana, which is uncommon to the kinds of refuge that you find within the person of smaller and intermediate scope. Although that's the case, that mere level of going for refuge like that, out of fear of the sufferings of existence, as well as the fear of peace, is not the fully qualified Mahayana refuge, because here, at that time, the refuge, as we've described it just now, is merely something which is a desire to achieve unexcelled true perfect awakening at that point, but that alone is not sufficient. One has to also have a mind, an attitude of not turning away from that refuge at any time whatsoever, and so that statement, I think, is also coming from J. Rinpoche. And so once, and as that was explained, once you've absolutely determined that you're going to have unexcelled true perfect awakening as your objective, then once you then form and make a firm commitment, pledge, to not turn away from that at any time in the future whatsoever, then it has become the special or fully qualified form of going for refuge within the Mahayana.
Oh yeah, 근데 이제 잠도 되라. 아니, 랑그 톱제 장주 투진 통모 많이 배 잠도 되라. 아니 랑그 랑기 톱제 주비 아니 장주 톰되지 로데 로여봤던지 매줘봐 로데 안에 뒤 나면 믿어봐 안에 담자와주고 거의 송도와대.
So this statement then shows that the mere wish to achieve Buddhahood and going for refuge out of that desire to become a fully awakened Buddha is the basic Mahayana refuge at the most sort of basic level. But it's not the qualified form of it that is also marked by a firm pledge or vow that one will never give up, relinquish this objective of becoming a fully awakened Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings at any time whatsoever.
Oh yeah, 근데 인상 점도 대라양 나는 바양다 버저베 창주 그셈 제네 셈미 도메 셈지 거 왔다. 매선 탐자자 송디 하나양 안나는 바양다 버저베 산제지 톰되지 셈지 제지 셈미 동어 송아 직바 인장 내다 매선 미동베 롱은나와 니라 이 유랑문도 주디 아니 안디 요 내가 요 말했어. nghe là khá số đấy, chăm rồi khi anh nằm bây giờ đã bắt đầu sản xuất, mấy đồ bị xâm nhập nghe là cái này, mấy số tham gia cái là cái đó, yang mấy số tham gia cái nghe là cái này, chăm rồi cái mấy đồ bị xâm nhập cái là cái đó, mà nghe vậy như này yang, anh chúc cái là nghe là chăm rồi chơi thì cái là anh xâm nhập cái đấy là cái gì hay vậy đấy.
So thus, if we think about it in this way, then this determination to become a fully awakened Buddha, which is the characteristic or attitude that with which one goes for refuge as a Mahayana practitioner, is similar to the attitude of developing the aspirational form of bodhicitta. That is, when you make the firm determination and pledge that you're not going to ever give up striving to become going for refuge out of the wish to become a fully awakened Buddha, and the attitude of never relinquishing the aspiration to become a Buddha, the form of bodhicitta which is aspirational in character. Those, in reality, those two, the way in which those manifest or become actualized within one's mind stream, there's no certainty as to the sequence. That is, one or the other could arise first within one's mind. But within the context of the rites, rituals, and practices, then there's a special reason why going for refuge appears first within rituals.
Oh yeah, that is. 잠도 잠보와당 잠도 쳐봐제 니원 안에 조디 잠바 잠도 잠보와디 아니 현주 주잡 라와 주잡做쳐봐 라와 아니 현주 주디비 꾸져서면 접수 줘봐 그 접수 잠도做쳐봐 쳐봐제인데 아니 랑게 대접 타도도 주비 아니 꾸져서면 저 퇴진하잖아 나 대마인 바이나 아니 다 기부 충지래라라야 랑게 토차타도래 충격값이 토다토는 온도 남면 돼와 딩거값이 토차타도데 내려 타봐 뭐라마 어디 랑게 토차타도 대체 토차타도데 아니 가서 현주를 때네 아니 현주기 아니 잡을 때네 아니做쳐봐대 규잡을做쳐봐라 수시 점도 잠보와니 규잡 做当 차파전에 랑그 토자 라랑기 아니 타도 그잡 차파전에 대접 做 쳐봐 이 성소 대비잡 그러와 나 집이 주충이 가서 대비잡대 가르래서나 치마 온도 한미 공부담 터드냐 와 예산테 그러와 대통대 아니 딩을 가서 내래 탈파통대
침을 갑라
지시직바 다다를 탐지를 와 좀 참.
지시직바
탐지셔봐 내래 탐지셔봐라 와 삼대. 이제 어디 와라 태용고 안 되니라다. 좀더 잠보와는 기럽죠 봐. 차반에 자자 做 쳐봐 인스. 내가 고소.
라. alors 수수 캡
유잡스나
유캡 저 So as far as the minimal level of going for refuge within these individual levels of the stages of the path, that minimal level of going for refuge is has primarily going for refuge in the causal sense, or seeing the refuge as the cause of the protection that one wishes as chief. So in the case of
점도 제바오지 점보와 생각에 점 유잡 유타대비 아니 잡점바보 안에 산제다 점모에 가서 쳐 유타대바기 안에 군조선다 때네 안에 접수 쪽에 점도대 유잡체 아니 제바 대접대 가서 랑게 톱차타도 지고 군조선다 접수 쪽에 접수 대접체 그래서 왔다 이자 점도 점보와디 유잡조 쳐봐 아니 차바지한테 대접 조차봐. 그런 거
So thus we can distinguish between the minimal level of going for refuge and the fully qualified form of going for refuge by whether it's we're talking about refuge in the causal sense or refuge as a result. In all three cases, the minimal level of going for refuge is viewing something outside of oneself as the refuge, and is going to that for refuge, some external force or being. Now, in the case of the resultant refuge, one is taking the result that one is going to try to actualize within oneself, like freedom from falling into the lower realms of existence in the case of the person of smaller scope, or the actualization of nirvana within the as an object of refuge in the causal sense within the person of intermediate scope, or the achievement of actual your own personal achievement of Buddhahood as the object of refuge in the resultant sense for the person of greater scope.
Oh yeah. 티쟁의 점도 삼재기 라제장 삼보와기 자주 삼반 남지 란디수 세가 로비 뒤에서 아니 접시라 때나 좋아나 좋아시 접시라 때나 좋아는 좋아 쳐봐다 나더니 랑기 토제 타도도 집에 자자 타도도 집에 산제 산제네 아니 시라 마대바 란도지 아니 좋아는 좋아 쳐봐 그봐 디 가르에서는 디 초남 디 베라 가르서는 초남 라장백이 아니 고점 바탕 어머니 니 샤라 로잖아 고다 바다 버리 삼보와디 샤라 로잖아 고다 바다 초남 어디 가르쳐봐와디 샤라 초 맞아 와라니 집어고 고다 바다 좀 잡아요
So the difference between these can be illustrated by an example, or if we take, first of all, within the sort of difference between taking refuge in the Mahayana from the basic level of it, and then the fully qualified form of taking refuge within the Mahayana. These two forms of going for refuge have different after effects or outcomes that arise from them. And the first of these is for like bodhisattvas during their own. So when a bodhisattva is practicing, but they're dependent upon others for the assistance in their enabling them to be able to help other sentient beings, then that is analogous to sort of the outcome of the kind of refuge where one is relying upon an external force or being for refuge. And then the second of these, when one has that fully qualified refuge of going for refuge to the state of Buddhahood, which the result, which one is going to actualize oneself, then that is that, like, once one has achieved Buddhahood, has become fully awakened, then with one's own ability, one's own force, one's able to liberate other sentient beings. And these two things can be illustrated by someone, like if you have friends and you want to help them, but you don't have the ability to do it on your own, you have to rely upon other people, or you have to call someone else in to help you out, to help them. That's an example that illustrates the first case. And then the second case of someone who has actualized the ability to help others on their own is like somebody who can, again, help friends, help someone out without needing to call upon the assistance of someone else for help.
Oh yeah, that did tennis on shot. Oh, dinam tinsan da bi loje jen, sanjeji ten drop ya, gati chepa namla, chatu migo ya. 是吧？上届的前脚把咱那样，俺那刚刚情感给没得的，没听说情感得到了，可个嘛的是。哦，特上光把说看给这样，跟他们马里把设备，接了嘛个罗嗦准备，我那么都起来，俺那得他的开发的需要人送过来，是吧？得把这咱们这个开发的拿来把这送下去，先把它写在要嘛的，得送过来，嗯。
So this has been taught here in this commentary for a special kind of purpose. That is that, and the author here says that nowadays people like myself who have such limited capacity, it's difficult. It's hard for us even to simply recite the names of the Buddha. And so for the time being, we don't really need this kind of explanation. But however,
But
I've taught it here just sort of as to fulfill a prayer of those who hold this tradition of Gelug, and so as to Lama so for those who hold that kind of tradition. And so as to clarify and clear away any kind of faults or sort of extra things that may have been added to their practice of hearing the teachings, thinking about the teachings, and meditating on the teachings.
Oh yeah. That time, Banja Chirim, Yambo Churim, Najawa, Shunchim, Gomba Yin, Swana Chene, Banja Zedi, Chewa. Yambo Chungrim, Chene, Zola Kagi, any Chimasawa Tigala, any Zola Kagi, Chimasawa, Zola Kanji, Tundu Jangas in the single Zola Kangi, Chimasawa Gala, Toma, Chima Raba Sane, Chimasam, and the Tawasawala, any Bezo Chimboka Nashi. Any Banja Chirim Napon, Ban Chirin Gala, Yambo Chungrim. Banja Taduti Gala, Yambo Chiri Toka, Deta Shunchim Comba, on the Janison Ori. They in the Toma, Divuchunga Gasu, and a Banja Migewa, Jubonala, and a Migo Jubongo Tsutim Zam Chichawa. Tenaya Chintigala, and a Casore, Koya Dunga, Koi Dunga, Bonga Dunga Jita Bongo by it, and Telatini Yambo Chiruchin, and or Damato be sheriff. Dame share up, Dame to be share tap to simple time is of a share ponge. 10 years, Sisi easy to Balatroga, and tap Chabar Changi, Tony to be share compola pongo, Yinzang, the Sungus, Panja Chirim down, Yimbo Churun, Java Shunchim, Compa Yimbe, Yansu Lebi Cheang, Panja Ponga, Cherapanam, Ponla, or Ponson Chungi, Jene, and then see Jimbaso too much to be better. Rabat Hambo say, was the that castle, Toma Desungua, Toma Migachu Pang, Dibachia Mishashi, give up Pusum Sawaja, Rangisem also to Denisama Tampa Yesegala, Toma Dibuchu in Nagala, Annie or Nason to Jessica to make up, and make a Jew of Pine. Then make it you Bon Tamji, any castle, as long as you are never as long as you are top of it, Lion make you Jenny, and even as long as you are someone a Jucha what you Mogu or Maza, I know courage you are Jucha what you are la, Tea la, any Mugu Panja Mugu Jejeki, Chatham Mosum down, Chatham Mosum Jejeki, any Maripa Pango down, or down. Tea any or图书去下边爬家的叫我帮过我，什么新的帮过我，一张地推送过我的，什么，不要说，你不帮着帮助其他帮那么啦，帮助穷人间呢，申请把说，起码区别别记，跟哪怕是看到差，第一年不穷人买讲，买那样，你不穷人这样，俺那边看说的马扎嘛给普通说话那些，你不穷的，白看说马年把说看都去过的是说话，但是要是马多把讲完，俺那帮助以前的抗疫马年把空头派上呢，俺那帮他们帮不给，俺那帮我记得，人家他们讲说找我用过的，说他真的送过没事。
So that's the way that this whole process works is that one starts off by employing a relatively small antidote to a relatively coarse obstacle or a coarse, relatively rough and gross level of defilement or a gross level of mental affliction. And then as one goes up through the path, then gradually you need more powerful more powerful antidotes to get rid of subtler and subtler forms of mental affliction and contamination as one progresses through the path. So this is this system in which one, the way in which one practices the stages of the path is that, first of all, so first of all, if you're talking about the path as it pertains to the person of smaller scope, in the very beginning, one develops again this fear of falling into the lower realms of existence, and that fear is again the basic source of refuge. So what is it that actually, but what is it that actually causes one to fall into the lower realms of existence? It's the performance of the 10 kinds of non-virtue of body, speech, and mind. Those negative karmas are the actual source of falling into the lower realms of existence. So for a person of smaller scope, they use a relatively easy kind of practice or something that is relatively easier to actualize. That is simply avoiding the non-virtues of body, speech, and mind. And in that way, they free themselves from an extremely heavy or coarse kind of suffering result, the falling into the lower realms of hell, hungry ghosts, and animal, and so forth. Then, as one progresses on the path, one uses a more powerful, somewhat more powerful antidote to remove a subtler form of obscuration or mental affliction. And in that case, one develops the more powerful antidote in that case would be developing the wisdom that understands selflessness or understands emptiness. And that serves as the antidote to the subtler form of mental affliction, which is the misconception or misunderstanding of the nature of the self. And once one actualizes that, then one is able to achieve liberation in that way. Then as one progresses up the path into the person of greater scope and has to become free from not only the misapprehension of the self, but also has to remove even the subtle obstacles, such as the obstacles that prevent the actualization of omniscience. Then one needs much more. Those are the subtlest forms of mental affliction, but and in order to eliminate them, one has to have the most powerful kind of antidote. So in order to do that, then, or the antidote in that case would be developing bodhicitta and in conjunction with the understanding the nature of reality, those two together. And so that's the basic sequence. This is explained in the ornament for the sutras, and it's illustrated by different examples. For example, if you're cleaning a temple, you start off by getting rid of the big dirt, the big pieces of dirt, and then you work down from there. It's relatively easy to get rid of the large chunks of dirt. And then as you go along, it takes more effort and more sort of subtler forms of cleaning to get rid of the dust and the subtle stains and like that. And or you can, the same illustration is like cleaning a cloth. Cloth that's been covered with, caked with dirt. It's relatively simple to knock off the big chunks of dirt, but then to get the subtler dirt, you have to employ stronger antidotes. Or another example that's given is the way in which mothers are able to kind of trick their children into doing what they want them to do by giving them sort of something that they want in order to get them to engage in the sort of, and use skillful means like that to be able to lead their children in the right direction.
Oh yeah, that did in the song to our Yanana Barimba, Shinduba, Rimba. 충종이 야바 섭섭 체네 부서와 나신 야마도 바 장배 안에 방도 이현대 림바 시도 관에 관도 파에데 타를 안에 방도 그 차샤 야 강화지 주그레스 텐데 마인바 연대 탐제 루부도 힘바 순저 루부도 중화지 온거 말레스 다다산제지 연대 파쇼 창섬 사도바시 그 연대 제장 텐데 여바 아데스가 덴바 미치바 태좀지에다 대장 내년에 뒤다보 다가 톰 무둑 세네 타바자 메제바 탐제 안에 공도 셔바기 명아딘데 안에 딘다